Keep your eyes locked on the young woman in a camel-colored coat. She's 26-year-old Jessica Hartman, a dental hygienist from Sacramento who'd taken the 30-minute drive to meet someone she'd been chatting with on Tinder for 2 weeks. Jessica stops near the Fashion Point entrance, checking her phone one more time, adjusting her hair with nervous fingers. She's dressed carefully for this first meeting, not too casual, not trying too hard, just right for a coffee date that might lead to lunch if things went well. At 2:39 p.m., a man enters the frame from the opposite direction. It's 2:42 p.m. when they disappear from this camera's perspective. What Jessica didn't know, what she couldn't have known despite weeks of messaging and video chats that seemed perfectly normal, was that Ryan wasn't who he claimed to be. His real name was Marcus Trent Bellamy, a 37-year-old with a criminal history spanning multiple states, wanted for questioning in connection with sexual assaults in Oregon and Nevada. A predator who'd perfected the art of online persona creation and victim selection because she became her own last witness. Welcome to Last Witness. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more haunting true crime stories that expose how modern technology connects us to both opportunity and danger. Jessica Hartman represented the demographic that online dating apps had revolutionized young professionals, busy with careers, socially connected but romantically single, turning to technology to find connection in an increasingly digital world. Born and raised in Sacramento's suburbs, Jessica was the middle child of 3 daughters in a close-knit family. Her father, David, worked as a middle school principal, and her mother, Susan, managed a dental practice where Jessica had eventually found her own calling as a hygienist. Jessica had graduated from Sacramento City College with her dental hygiene degree in 2019 and had been working at a private practice in Roseville for the past 3 years, building a reputation as gentle, with anxious patience, and meticulous in her work. At 26, Jessica lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Natomas with her best friend from college, Maya, splitting rent and building that post-college life of work, gym memberships, weekend brunches, and occasional nights out. She'd been single for about a year after a 3-year relationship ended amicably when her ex took a job in Seattle. Friends described Jessica as cautious but optimistic, the type who researched restaurants before trying them and always texted when she arrived home safely, but also believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. She'd been on Tinder for about 6 months, going on a handful of first dates that hadn't led anywhere serious, a reality that roughly 40 million Americans using dating apps could relate to. When Ryan matched with her in late October, his profile seemed perfect. Attractive but not model handsome. Professional photos that showed him at a construction site with blueprints, hiking at Lake Tahoe, sitting in what appeared to be a nice restaurant. His bio was witty without trying too hard. Architect by day, amateur chef by night. Looking for someone who appreciates good coffee and bad puns. Bonus points if you can name more than 3 Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. Their messaging rapport developed quickly. Ryan asked thoughtful questions about Jessica's work, shared stories about challenging clients and building projects, sent funny memes, and graduated to video calls after the first week. 2 FaceTime conversations where Jessica felt comfortable enough to commit to meeting in person. She'd followed all the safety rules she'd learned. They'd messaged extensively before meeting. She'd video chatted to confirm he looked like his photos. She'd chosen a public meeting place. She'd told Maya exactly where she'd be and promised to check in regularly. "If you don't hear from me by 5 p.m., start worrying," Jessica had joked that Saturday morning, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. That November morning, Jessica had woken up with first date butterflies, spending extra time on her hair and makeup, changing outfits 3 times before settling on the camel coat and dark jeans that made her feel confident but comfortable. She'd driven from Sacramento to Roseville's Westfield Galleria because Ryan had suggested it as a midpoint that offered multiple date options. They could grab coffee, walk around, maybe catch a movie if things went well. No pressure, just seeing if the chemistry translates to in person. Ryan had texted the night before, followed by a smiley face emoji. Jessica had arrived at the mall at 2:30 p.m., parking on the 3rd level of the north parking structure, checking her appearance one more time in the car's visor mirror before texting Ryan, "Here, meeting you by Fashion Point like we planned." His response came within seconds. "On my way. Excited to finally meet you." Jessica locked her car, dropped her keys into her purse alongside her phone, pepper spray, and wallet, and took the elevator down to the 2nd floor where they'd agreed to meet. The mall was busy, but not overwhelming. The perfect environment for a first date, public enough to feel safe, crowded enough that any awkward silences would be drowned out by ambient noise. At 2:39 p.m., Jessica spotted Ryan walking toward her, and her first thought, captured later in text messages she'd sent to Maya during those few minutes, was relief. He looks just like his photos. No catfish situation. That text would be the last communication Jessica would send to anyone. The security footage from the second-floor corridor showed the greeting, the handshake, the smiles, the conversation that lasted 3 minutes. Investigators would later hire lip-reading specialists to analyze what was said during those exchanges. The analysis, imperfect but reasonably confident, revealed mundane first-date pleasantries. "Hi, it's so nice to finally meet you in person. Ryan, Marcus, you too, you look great. How was the drive?" Jessica, "Easy, not much traffic. This mall is huge." Ryan, Marcus, "Yeah, I thought we could grab coffee downstairs and just walk around if that sounds good." "Perfect. I'm always up for good coffee." The conversation appeared natural, comfortable, exactly what two people meeting for the first time should look like. There was no visible tension, no body language suggesting Jessica felt uncomfortable or unsafe. When Ryan gestured toward the escalator and suggested heading to Starbucks, Jessica agreed readily, and they walked together toward the down escalator, disappearing from the second-floor camera's view at 2:42 p.m. The escalator itself had cameras, one at the top and one at the bottom, and both captured Jessica and Marcus riding down together, still talking, Marcus saying something that made Jessica laugh. They stepped off at the first floor and walked toward the main entrance area where Starbucks was located, but they never arrived at Starbucks. The next camera that should have captured them, positioned near the coffee shop entrance, never recorded them entering its field of view. Investigators would spend hours reviewing footage from multiple cameras throughout the mall, trying to track Jessica and Marcus's route. What they discovered was chilling in its premeditation. Marcus had clearly studied the mall's layout and camera positions beforehand. Instead of heading directly to Starbucks as suggested, he directed Jessica down a side corridor near the Nordstrom entrance, an area that led to mall administrative offices and, crucially, a service hallway that employees used to access the parking structures without going through public areas. This corridor had only one security camera, positioned at the far end, and it captured Jessica and Marcus entering the hallway at 2:44 p.m. Marcus's hand on Jessica's lower back, in a gesture that could have been gentlemanly or controlling, impossible to determine from the footage alone. They walked the length of the corridor and pushed through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" that led to a concrete stairwell connecting directly to the parking structure. There were no cameras in the stairwell, a security gap that mall management would later scramble to address, but far too late to help Jessica. What happened in that stairwell would be reconstructed later through forensic evidence and Marcus's eventual confession, but the immediate result was captured by the parking structure's camera system. At 2:51 p.m., Marcus emerged from the stairwell door on the third level of the north parking structure, the same level where Jessica had parked, walking quickly toward the structure's exit ramp. He was alone. Jessica was nowhere to be seen on any camera. By 3:30 p.m., when Jessica hadn't checked in as promised, Maya started texting. "How's it going? Is he cool?" No response. At 4 p.m., "Jess, you okay?" Still nothing. At 4:30 p.m., Maya tried calling, straight to voicemail. By 5 p.m., when Jessica still hadn't responded and wasn't answering her phone, Maya's concern escalated to genuine worry. Jessica never ignored texts for hours, especially when she'd promised to check in. Maya called Jessica's parents, trying not to alarm them but needing to see if they'd heard from her. They hadn't. At 5:30 p.m., Maya made the decision to call Roseville Police Department to report her concern. The dispatcher initially tried to reassure Maya. Adults often got caught up in dates and forgot to check in, but Maya was insistent. "You don't understand. Jessica always checks in. Something's wrong." By 6 p.m., when Jessica's phone continued going straight to voicemail and tracking apps showed her last location as the mall parking structure hours earlier, police elevated the situation to an active missing person investigation. Officers were dispatched to Westfield Galleria to begin their search. Jessica's silver Honda Civic was found exactly where she'd parked it on the third level of the north structure, locked and undisturbed. Her car keys were missing, presumably still in her purse. Security was contacted, and footage was pulled immediately. Detectives watched the surveillance videos with growing alarm, tracking Jessica from her arrival through the mall, the meeting with her date, the walk toward Starbucks that never reached its destination, the diversion into the service corridor, and finally, the stairwell door closing behind them. Then nothing. No footage of Jessica emerging. Only Marcus, walking alone, leaving the structure. "We need to identify this man immediately," the lead detective told mall security. "And we need every camera angle you have of him." Mall security provided dozens of clips showing Marcus throughout the property, entering through the main entrance at 2:35 p.m., walking through various corridors, always staying just far enough from cameras that facial recognition would be difficult, but close enough to appear normal. The footage from the second-floor greeting provided the clearest view of his face. Still, images were extracted and distributed to officers. But who was he? Ryan, from the Tinder profile, wasn't providing any real leads. Investigators working with Tinder's parent company discovered the profile used fake email accounts, burner phone numbers, and photos that were eventually traced to stock photography and stolen social media images. Ryan, the architect from Sacramento, didn't exist. The profile had been created 3 months earlier, had matched with multiple women, and had conversations with at least a dozen potential victims before Jessica. Most of those conversations had fizzled out when the women lost interest or felt something was off, but Jessica had been the one who'd agreed to meet in person. While the manhunt for the unidentified suspect intensified, a more immediate question tormented investigators. Where was Jessica? A team was deployed to search the parking structure top to bottom, every stairwell, every corner, the rooftop parking level, the service areas. Nothing. The stairwell, where Jessica and Marcus had disappeared, was processed as a potential crime scene. Blood evidence was found on the concrete landing between the second and third floor, small droplets that would later be matched to Jessica through DNA analysis. Signs of a struggle, scuff marks on the wall, Jessica's phone found in a corner with a cracked screen, her purse discarded behind a fire extinguisher, contents spilled, but wallet and keys missing. The forensic evidence painted a horrifying picture. Marcus had attacked Jessica in that stairwell, probably within seconds of the door closing behind them, moving from charming date to violent predator in an instant. He'd struck her, the head trauma evident from blood spatter patterns, likely knocking her unconscious or at least disoriented enough that she couldn't fight back effectively or scream. He'd taken her car keys and wallet, rifled through her purse, and then… what? How had he gotten Jessica out of the stairwell without being seen on cameras? The answer came from examining the stairwell more carefully. The structure connected not just to parking levels, but also to a ground-level service exit that opened to a loading area behind the mall, used by delivery trucks and service vehicles. This exit had a camera, but review of that footage showed something crucial. At 2:48 p.m., a white panel van with no markings had backed up to the service door, blocking the camera's view of the actual exit. The van remained positioned there for approximately 4 minutes, then drove away. Investigators now had their answer. Marcus had somehow transported Jessica through that service door and into a waiting vehicle, using the van to block camera views. The van's license plate was partially visible in a wide-angle shot from another security camera covering the loading area. Within hours, detectives had traced the plate to a vehicle reported stolen 3 days earlier from a shopping center in Sacramento. The van was found abandoned Sunday morning in a remote area of Placer County, about 15 miles from the mall. Forensic examination of the van's interior revealed Jessica's DNA, fiber evidence from her coat, and clear signs that someone had been transported in the cargo area, while incapacitated blood, torn fabric, and most heartbreaking of all, scratch marks on the interior walls, suggesting Jessica had regained consciousness at some point during transport and tried desperately to escape. But the van yielded something even more crucial: a clear fingerprint on the steering wheel that didn't belong to the van's owner. That print was run through AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification system, and returned a hit. Marcus Trent Bellamy, age 37, with arrests in Oregon, Nevada, and California for assault, sexual battery, theft, and violation of restraining orders. His last known address was in Reno, but he'd been evicted 4 months earlier, and his current whereabouts were unknown. His parole officer, Bellamy, had been released from prison in Oregon 2 years earlier after serving time for sexual assault, reported he'd stopped checking in 6 months ago and was wanted for parole violations. Bellamy's photo from his most recent arrest was compared to the mall security footage of Ryan, and despite minor differences in appearance, Bellamy had grown his hair longer and added facial hair. Forensic analysts confirmed it was the same man. Suddenly, investigators had a name, a face, a criminal history, and a pattern. Detectives dove into Bellamy's background, discovering he'd been linked to at least 3 other cases of women meeting men from dating apps and subsequently being assaulted, 2 in Oregon who'd survived and reported their attacks, and 1 in Nevada who'd disappeared and was never found. In each case, the suspect had used different names and different profile photos, but the MO was consistent. Charming online persona, suggest meeting at a mall or shopping center, divert the victim to a less monitored area, attack. Bellamy was a serial predator who'd refined his tactics over years. An intensive manhunt launched, with Bellamy's face plastered across every news outlet in Northern California and Nevada. Tips poured in, but most led nowhere. Days passed with no sign of Jessica, and the harsh reality settled in. This was likely no longer a rescue mission, but a recovery operation. The question wasn't whether Jessica had been killed, but where Bellamy had taken her body. The break came 8 days after Jessica's disappearance, when a hiker in the El Dorado National Forest, about 45 miles northeast of Sacramento, noticed disturbed earth in a remote area off a fire access road. Sheriff's deputies investigated and discovered a shallow grave containing Jessica Hartman's body. She'd been sexually assaulted, beaten, and ultimately strangled her death, likely occurring within hours of the mall abduction. The location was remote enough that finding her might have taken months or years without the hiker's observation. Marcus Bellamy was captured 3 days later in Sparks, Nevada, spotted by an alert gas station clerk who recognized him from news coverage. He offered no resistance during arrest, sitting silently in the patrol car as though he'd been expecting the end would come eventually. In interrogation, Bellamy initially denied everything, claiming mistaken identity, insisting he'd never been to that mall. But when confronted with fingerprint evidence, DNA matches, and most damning of all, the security footage showing him meeting Jessica, walking with her, directing her into that service corridor, his story changed. He admitted meeting Jessica but claimed it was consensual, that they decided to leave together, that things had gotten out of hand, that he'd panicked when she died. His version of events was contradicted by every piece of forensic evidence, every timeline reconstruction, every detail of meticulously planned attack. At trial, prosecutors presented the security footage in its entirety, creating a minute-by-minute timeline of Jessica's final hours. Jurors watched her arrive at the mall, hopeful and excited for a first date. They watched her meet Marcus, saw her smile and laugh, observed her walking willingly with someone she believed was a potential romantic partner. They watched her disappear into that service corridor, heading toward what she thought was a coffee date. And they watched Marcus emerge alone, Jessica reduced to cargo in a stolen van. The jury took just 3 hours to convict Marcus Bellamy of first-degree murder, kidnapping, sexual assault, and multiple other charges. At sentencing, Jessica's family delivered victim impact statements that left the courtroom in tears. "My daughter trusted," her mother Susan said, her voice breaking. "She was careful. She told friends where she'd be. She met in public. She did everything we tell young women to do to stay safe. And still, a monster found her." Bellamy received life in prison without possibility of parole, multiple consecutive sentences that ensured he'd never see freedom again. In the aftermath, dating app companies faced pressure to implement better verification systems, though the reality remained that determined predators would always find ways to deceive. Westfield Galleria installed dozens of additional cameras, eliminated blind spots in service areas, and implemented new protocols requiring all service corridors to remain locked with keycard access. Jessica's family established a foundation promoting dating safety awareness and funding programs, teaching young adults how to navigate online dating more safely. The mall's second-floor corridor, where Jessica met Marcus Bellamy, became an informal memorial, with flowers occasionally left by the Fashion Point entrance by people who'd followed the case. And in evidence storage, the security footage remained a permanent record of moment when hope met horror, when a first date became a death sentence, when Jessica Hartman walked through that mall believing she was meeting someone special and instead encountered evil wearing a charming smile. Through those cameras, through that footage that documented her final hours of freedom, Jessica became her own last witness.